Hey, um, thank you so much for making time for this interview. We share the same Dutch publisher, Blauwgras, and I just want to start off by saying that I'm a huge fan of your writing. I came across like your novel, the English version, I think somewhere last year, just by accident, just walking into one of my favorite bookstores, and I don't know, some novels have like this magnetic pull. And before you even read like the short description, you just already know that you're gonna buy it. And this was the case with Blessings. And I saw the cover, I read the name, and I just bought it immediately. And later that week, I met up with Edward, the founder of Blauwgras, to discuss my own novel. And I was like, hey, I bought this book and it's beautiful. I'm reading it right now. You should read it too. And he was like, oh my God, dude, you must be kidding because I've been in contact with his team and I'm trying to do everything in my power to get the rights for the Dutch version. And here we are. Um, since the release of Blessings or Zegeningen, as we call it here in Holland, um, your debut novel has been translated to several languages: Spanish, German, Dutch. So my first question is, how does it feel to have written a novel that gets to travel across oceans?
Oh, yeah. First of all, thank you so much, Killian, for doing this with me. And also thank you for the pronunciations of both the publishing
Zegeningen?
company and the novel because you don't even know what I've been pronouncing them in my head. So I guess now I know how it's pronounced. But it's been such an amazing experience. I remember when Edward first approached me with sort of wanting to acquire the Dutch rights. I thought the same thing I always think whenever, my agent informs me that we've gotten sort of yet another foreign language right or approach to acquire the right. Really the question in my head is why? Because when I was conceiving of the novel in Port Harcourt, I was
Yeah.
thinking, like a small town boy growing up in small town Port Harcourt, and coming of age in Port Harcourt. And it's incredible to me that, people in the Netherlands would want to read about this boy in Port Harcourt, or that
Mm,
people in Spain or Germany or Portuguese or Brazil as the case or Portugal as the case may be. So I think it's that I still haven't gotten over my sense of wonder whenever, foreign publishers want to acquire the foreign translation rights because I don't know why. But then of course beyond that, I'm just so grateful and just so
mm,
amazed by how something that really started out small in my head just took on wings and is now being received and read by readers all over the world. It's truly the most humbling experience and the most flattering experience that I've ever had.
mm. That's beautiful. Were you nervous before the novel came out?
Oh yes, I was. I was. And for obvious reasons, if you read the novel, the subjects that the novel covers, especially also because I wrote the novel while I was living in Nigeria,
Mm, mm,
and I didn't know at the time that I would eventually leave Nigeria.
mm,
So there was a possibility that the novel might have come out when I was still living in Nigeria, and I
mm,
was worried slightly about what the reception would be. Particularly again, if I was still in Nigeria when it came out, what that would mean for me and my safety.
mm, mm,
So I was concerned when the novel was about to be published. And even when it came out and it was about to, a Nigerian publisher then tried to acquire it.
mhm,
Myself and my team were also concerned as to, again, what that would mean, for
mhm,
my safety if it were to be published in Nigeria.
mhm,
I had all these concerns, but I think ultimately for me, what it boiled down to was that the more I worried about it being published, the more important it felt to me for it to be published. Because then I had to ask myself, well, why am I worried?
yeah.
The source of my worry is the very reason why the novel has to be published.
I think it also speaks to the power of stories, right? You know, knowing what a story written on paper, putting something out like that, what it can do. Um, and I read somewhere that your father used to own a bookstore and that you got to read as many books as you wanted to, or maybe as you dared to read as a kid? Because I heard you say in a podcast that you were reading books that you had no business reading at your age. So what kind of stories were you drawn to as a child, and what did those books bring you?
Yes, yeah, my father used to own a bookstore, two bookstores actually at some point. And then there was a very famous fire
Mm,
that
mm,
engulfed the whole market and basically just
oh,
burned down his whole both his bookstores. And I yes, back then I used to read books that I had no business reading. I would read just for want of something to read. Some of them just didn't make sense. For instance, I would be reading the dictionary cover to cover. I
mm,
would read pamphlets. I would read religious texts.
mm.
Actually, one of my early reading, I would say storytelling inspirations was the Bible.
Oh,
I would read Bible stories and um, not because I was not for any particular religious reason, but just because of the
mm.
stories. I was very fascinated.
Yeah, the Bible is wild.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's wild in that aspect. But
Mm,
then I would also read sort of Western. I would read romance series.
mm.
And I'm talking about steamy romance series, and I was maybe 10.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Um, and yes, I would read everything. And then at some point, I think what I got from everything I was reading at the time is that I was just if the Bible, for instance, you would think that the typical thing you look for in the Bible, of course, is I supposed to access the Word of God. But for me, I
Mm,
was just drawn to the human stories. I was drawn to I think it was Martha who, when one, I don't, Mary and Martha, one of them was running errands and the other was just sitting at Jesus's feet. And I
mm,
was drawn to that. What made her do that? Just the human aspect of that.
mm.
Or, the boy who sort of volunteers his meal that then gets turned into 1,000 fishes and bread, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm drawn to, and then my question now is, oh, how did the boy feel then when that happened?
Yeah.
How does his life progress onward? And things like that. So I would read all those Western too, and I would just wonder about the lives that these people were living and leading. And
Yeah.
even if those stories, especially in the sort of the Western books I read, were nothing, their lives were nothing like mine,
Mm,
it did allow me, I think, the freedom to imagine and to wonder and to just, think endlessly about what these people were doing. I think it was John Palahiro who said the beauty of reading sometimes is that it allows you to travel without moving your feet.
mm,
So I found myself just traveling until, of course, at some point I did encounter books that reflected my own reality.
mm,
Um, I think it was with the African Writer series. So then I was reading books by Chinua Achebe and Buchiya Mecheta, and suddenly
mm.
I could, I could
Right.
travel sort of
Yeah.
within my own experience.
Wow. Well, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful way of saying it. You're traveling through the books and also maybe living several lives through characters. It's beautiful. I listened to another podcast as well that features you, and I heard you talking about your grandmother, and that growing up she used to tell you a lot of stories, and later on you used to tell your friends a lot of stories even before becoming a writer. So looking back on your youth, like what did you learn from your grandmother about the art of storytelling? And maybe to be more specific, is there a little bit of your grandmother's secret storytelling sauce in your own writing?
I would hope so.
Yeah.
And I think so many things, so many things. But one of the things I learned, I think, from her would be, first of all, the power of embellishment.
Mm,
And it's interesting to
mm,
me how, because most of the stories she told were not new. We've heard them
mm,
before. Because she didn't anyway. So sometimes we got told the same story over and over again, and yet it was still just as interesting every single
mm,
time I heard it. For the most part, anyway. I think maybe number one of the reasons might be because I was a child, obviously,
mm,
so it took very little to get my attention.
mm,
But also, I really do think it also boiled down to the embellishment because there was something new every time. The tortoise would have two ears the first time we heard the story, and the
mm.
next time we heard the story, the tortoise all of a sudden has three ears. And then the tortoise did this, and then tomorrow, the same story, the tortoise is doing something else. But it's the same story. So I think it's all those embellishments. So you never quite knew what
Yeah,
what to expect.
yeah.
and I also think, they definitely thrived on suspense. So
Mhm.
there's a sense of, well, wait for it. And it's funny because it's like, what am I waiting for? I already know how this story ends.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yet again, maybe as a
Which,
result of that embellishment, you still are surprised every time.
which is an art form. It's just like it's also very theatrical, right?
It
Would you
is.
say like that Nigerian people are kind of theatrical as well?
Yes, yes. I think Nigerians thrive on theatrics.
Mm,
And that definitely in maybe in much more subtle way feature in my own writing. So I
mm,
would say yes, maybe the source is retained in mine.
It's something that's also like very relatable for me in the Caribbean, where I come from. Like, it's only when I moved that I realized that how theatrical like my aunties and my grandma like people are on a daily basis. So it's very relatable. Um, as a Caribbean kid who also read like a lot of books and also got to travel through books and having friends that only exist between pages, I also feel like I have lived different lives through books. But there weren't that many stories that featured queer characters that looked like me, and who lived in a world that looked like mine, and definitely not a lot of stories centered around the experience of queer boys as the main storyline. So I was wondering, like, what was that like for you growing up in Nigeria? Were there any books by Nigerian or West African authors that featured queer characters who mirrored your own experience as a queer boy?
Not when I was growing up, no.
Mm,
Now there is, now I feel like I'm so happy to see that, much more queer content is coming out of the continent. But at the time
mhm,
I was growing up, no. I think maybe they were just a handful. And they were not what I would call sort of positive representations.
mhm,
I remember I think there's a queer character in one of Wole Soyinka's books,
mhm,
but the character or characters were viewed by the village as the odd ones. We
mhm,
never quite got to hear from them. So I would say they weren't properly humanized in those books,
mhm,
in that book. And then, of course, at some point in my life too, I think I would then see sort of a handful of queer characters in some of the books that I was reading, but it wasn't about the characters. They were often sort of side characters. So there's a main
Props.
character,
Yeah.
props,
Yeah.
you could say. So there's a main character who's sort of just observing and commenting on these characters. They weren't necessarily characters in their own right.
Mhm,
So no, I would say that by the time I set out to write Blessings, I hadn't really read extensively. I hadn't read really at all. I would, if I'm remembering correctly, any book
mhm,
that was written from the perspective of a queer character that was about that queer character.
mhm,
It's not any major publication.
mhm,
So it was supposedly new territory for me. But then again,
mhm.
of course, as I said, since the time the Blessings has been published, I can think of up to five,
Yeah.
books,
Yeah.
yeah, about centered around queer African characters that have been published. So I'm hoping that this is the beginning of some kind of revolution, I think.
So if I say the words like Nigerian queer legacy or African queer legacy, what comes to mind, or what do you feel?
Oh, that's interesting. That's such a Um, I don't know. I think maybe we would need about 10 years in the future to look back on that legacy.
Mm,
But I suppose what comes to mind now when you say that is just I'm just imagining sort of this chorus of voices
yeah.
of
Yeah.
different artists contributing to something again to some kind of revolution, whether that's via paintings or via literature or via media, and creating something I think for the future generation to look back at and admire, or just a foundation for the future generation to build on. Again, I don't think, for instance, if I look back now, from
Mhm.
this point, looking back, that I do see any kind of legacy or any kind of sort of substantial legacy. So I'm hoping that what's happening now would form a basis for something that the future generation can look back and consider a legacy.
Yeah, so I was just about to say, I feel like your book is part of that, right? It's part of like an essential piece of that puzzle.
That's such a huge responsibility, but
Yeah, I know, I know, but it is because I don't know. I think sometimes it's legacy is something that, it takes time, but it's also something I think that's not static, right? It's also like always in motion, I would say, or like there are always people who like contribute to legacy to always contribute things that eventually become a legacy. So yeah, no, I feel like you can own that. I feel like yeah.
Thank you.
Um, I would say that the performance of masculinity in is a major theme in your novel. And one of the characters that performed a more socially accepted version of masculinity was Obiafuna's brother. I really enjoyed the arc of that character. And I'm not going to spoil too much, but there's a specific moment that touched me deeply. I'm talking about that scene where Ekene reminds Obiafuna who he really is by encouraging him to dance, just like Obiafuna used to dance as a kid. And I feel like thereby he encouraged Obiafuna to do the thing that he was punished for as a kid. Um, and even thinking about it now, I just like have goosebumps just seeing that scene in my head because it's such a beautiful display of brotherly love between two young men who have to navigate masculinity in completely different ways. What is the value of relationships between straight and queer men to you?
Wow. Your questions are just so I need a moment to sit with them.
Yeah, of course, no worries, no worries.
Um,
Perfect.
um, but yes, I think that is it. I think I wanted to use those brothers to illustrate what I suppose what an optimistic view I have as to what relationships can look like between men of different sort of sexual identities, one
Mm,
straight, one gay. Of course, we do know that in this case they're brothers, so it sort of stems primarily from brotherly love. But
mm,
I also think it sort of extends beyond that. It is my vision, I suppose, of the world, my optimistic vision of the world, of what the world can be.
mm,
The kind of I suppose it's a kind of brotherhood that I am hopeful for, that I envision. And I
mm,
was very, as you can tell, I cared about the character of Ekene because I do think that they're very different characters, as you said, they're navigating masculinity very differently. But fundamentally, they also realize that they're sort of cut from the same cloth, and they're, products of the same stock. And even if they have to navigate life differently, they realize that at the end of the day, they're quite the same, or they're, from the same um,
mm,
line, so to speak. But yes, anyway, to just answer the question simply, that was to the relationship that they had was my way of illustrating the vision my optimistic vision of the world, of what relationships can be between straight men and queer men, and how I don't think that, sexuality that sort of belonging to different sexuality has to
mm,
sort of cause any kind of rift.
mm.
Um, but yeah, but then even more than that, I also wanted to show that at the end of the day, these are fundamentally brothers who
Yeah.
will be there for each other and who, different, also experience the world differently. And I will say also that because I feel like for the most part, it's easy to see Obiefuna as the victim and to see Ekene as the sort of the one who has it good or better. But there are
Hmm.
also aspects where Ekene falls short. For instance, Obiefuna is excellent academically and Ekene isn't. And that might
Mm,
seem like that might seem like, it's nothing. But actually, in Nigeria, I would say it's something. Because excelling in school, doing well in school is a kind of privilege in its own right. And of course, not excelling in school is a kind of failing in its own right. So Ekene does feel like there are aspects where Obiefuna does better than he does.
mhm.
And then, of course, there are other aspects too where Ekene excels and Obiefuna falls short. But in that moment, they both realize that it doesn't have to be about that. It doesn't have to be about what one is good at and the other isn't, but they can just be brothers.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like a competition, and they get to celebrate each other, on their own terms.
Exactly.
Um, Beautiful. Just like one of the characters that really touched me most.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
of course, not like when talking about masculinity. I have to also ask about Abiafuna's father. You gave Abiafuna a father who probably mirrors the fathers of many boys like Abiafuna. Um, what do you hope fathers who dare to read stories like this take away from this novel? Like,
Yes, that I mean, among others, that the violence never does anything at the end of the day. It never
mm,
solves any situation.
mm,
The dialogue is always the best route to go.
mm,
And I'm happy you asked that question because it's I was hoping that parents of all people would read this book. And I was so delighted, but also so surprised the other day to hear that um, a book club in Port Harcourt of all places that was made up of mothers. So I think yeah
wow,
yeah so
that's
a
beautiful.
group of women who had kids came together and formed a book club, and then every month they would select a book to read, and then I heard that they selected Blessings as I think it was a January of 20 this year January peak. And they reached out to me on Instagram to say they were reading Blessings, and I looked them up and I thought, oh my goodness, a book club that's made of Nigerian mothers. And in my head, when I'm thinking about sort of conservative Nigerian mothers, I'm thinking, oh, I can imagine the horror when they read and they're discussing the book. But no, they reached out to me later on and they said they had such a wonderful time. They gave the book really high ratings.
Wow,
And I thought, oh, well, people continue
that,
to surprise me. And that made me very happy because now I'm thinking, I don't imagine, of course, that all of them, or even most of them sitting there are sort of liberal and open-minded. I imagine that many of them are, even conservative. Many of them would have had reservations, but for me, at least now they know. Now they've
yeah, yeah, yeah,
now they've seen, how another woman reacts when her son
yeah,
is queer. So my hope then is, if one of their kids, turn out to be queer, they have a context with which to engage that
mm,
conversation, and there's a beginning point. And I think maybe that's what I'm hoping to for any father that would pick up the novel to read, or that when they read the novel, as much as they would roll their eyes and be offended and give it lambasted, give it negative reviews, now they have a context, and they've
yeah,
seen themselves in literature, because I think that's the point of
yeah.
literature at the end of the day, the ability to see yourself represented. So
To
when
mirror, right?
yeah, exactly. So when they see themselves represented, now they have a context for when the son turns out to be, queer, they have somewhere to begin the conversation from.
Mm. Oh, that's thanks for sharing. I can just imagine the book club with all the mothers and
I wanted to
um
be a fly on the wall.
yeah, I mean, I get that. It's also so I don't know, wholesome in a way, but also so heartwarming that they got to also live, also live a life through blessings as well. That's foreign to them. Um, wow, that's beautiful. They should make a podcast. I would listen to that podcast. Um, Speaking about women, about mothers, you gave Obiafuna a mother who, in a way, was experiencing her own coming of age story throughout the novel, like be it invoked by her own tragedy and concerns for the well-being of her son. But I think in her story, it's like a balancing act that probably like a lot of mothers, sisters, aunties, women uh, will recognize. Did you feel a certain responsibility to take care of Uzumaka?
Oh, yes. Yes. I think
Yeah,
as you can tell, that was a character that I really, really liked and cared
yeah.
very deeply about.
Mm,
Um, but so yes, I did feel a responsibility, and has scenes where some of the hardest to write. Especially, the letter scenes where not to spoil the novel, but we see what happens. It was
mm,
incredibly
mm,
hard to write those scenes. I had to pause sometimes because that was a writer that was a character that I cared deeply about and a character that I absolutely wanted to take care of.
mm,
She was also a character that came very early to me. The second I conceived of Obiefuna's voice, I also conceived of Uzamaka's. And she was just as, in my opinion, just as central to the novel as Obiefuna was.
Hmm.
And I like that you comment on the balancing act because that was the huge thing for me. I wanted to create a Nigerian mother that I knew,
Hmm.
one who I also wanted to answer the question of, well, so there's a mother who's objectively, devoted to her son and cares deeply for her son, but at the same time she's also very Christian and very religious and devoted to her religion. And I didn't want her to swing too far in either direction. So to swing too far to religion, where she becomes sort of a fanatic and completely abandons her son, or even to swing too far to her son's side, where she becomes, fully an ally and completely abandons her religion, because I didn't think either was realistic. I think the reality, sadly, of most Nigerian women or most Nigerian parents, or mostly mothers, is a kind of balancing act,
Yeah.
balancing in this situation, balancing what you believe to be your traditional morals and what you believe to be just your instinctive love for your children, especially when your children turn out to not be what you had hoped. So I wanted the novel to be about her oscillating between both modes and balancing the act of caring for Biafuna while holding on to her faith.
Yeah, it was such a captivating character as well, and I love there was so much realness to her story, and I think because her struggle the with accepting her own situation, but also like learning from her son, that was so. I think like there's a lot of queer parents of queer kids um, don't share what that process is like, and I feel like with Uzumaki we got to like experience that from the perspective of a mother, and that's as a queer kid so valuable as well. So I can imagine that that's also one of the characters that kind of like facilitates conversations between queer kids and their parents. Or I would hope so. I would hope so.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then for my last question already, um, so I would like to believe that Obiafuna lives on beyond the pages of your novel, and considering the state of the world with queer people still being targeted and still being treated like second-class citizens, and the rights of queer people being stripped all over the world, if we imagine that Obiafuna lives on somewhere, what advice on well-being would you give him?
Wow. I would say leave somewhere that's preferably outside of Nigeria. And if he does, I think my advice would be, and that's I am the last person to give life advice. I don't know why anybody would come to me for life advice. But I think especially if he's outside of Nigeria, I think I would tell him to just chill. Just have a glass of wine and chill for a minute. Because
Yeah.
I do think that growing up in Nigeria, as I think one of the characters in Blessings points out, can be, as a queer person, can be being constantly at war. It can be like growing up in wartime. So nearly every day you wake up is a kind of fight for survival. So when he
Mm.
finally, hopefully, leaves Nigeria, I would say it's okay. He shouldn't fight anymore. At least for the next 1 year. Maybe he can resume the fight back
Just
back
like
home after 1 year. But he should just maybe just take 1 year and just chill and just
beautiful. Yeah.
drink wine and just lounge by the pool and read books and be himself and go to the club and go to the bars and get laid and
Yeah.
fall, fall in love and get into fall in and out of relationships and yeah, so I do think that because I do think that he would need that peace and just that ability to just live and not survive for a while to get back all that was lost. Because a lot,
Yeah.
I do think that a lot is lost in Nigeria as queer kids grow
Yeah, yeah. I think I mean you're great at giving advice because I
up.
mean joy reminding queer people, queer kids from Nigeria, from other areas of the world, where joy is not something that's always a given. Just reminding queer kids of that is essential. So wherever Obiafuna is, I hope he has a lot of joy in his life.
Yeah, here's my best wishes.
Yeah. Um, Thank you so much. Like it was just such an honor to get to have this conversation with you. And yeah, again, I'm a huge fan, so it was a pleasure, like getting to do this with you. And thanks for answering my questions. And I don't know, are you? What are your plans for the holidays?
Yes. I just got back. I want to go back to London.
Yeah, of course.
I left London kicking and screaming. It was such a good time. So now I don't know what to do with myself now that I'm back here. But I'm thinking I might go up to the DMV area to see some friends of mine for Christmas.
Oh, nice.
And then I really have nothing else to do again until school. Maybe I suppose just stay at home and write until school resumes, and school resumes in late January. So
Mm.
no plans. I really don't know. I really have nothing to do with myself.
I mean, also sounds like a luxury. So
It does. It does. It's a good problem to have, I suppose.
yeah. So enjoy
Oh,
it.
you?
So me, family, lots of family and lots of chilling because I've had quite a year. So I'm gonna enjoy doing nothing. Yeah. But thank you so much. Also on behalf of Blauwgras and yeah, I'm sure like a lot of I hope like a lot of Dutch people will pick up Zegeningen um, and travel with Obiafuna. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much, Killian, for doing this.
Yes, of course.